In recent years, concerns have grown surrounding microplastics, the tiny particles of plastic that can be found all around us in the air, in our blood, in our lungs. We are constantly ingesting microplastics through the water that we drink, through other beverages, through seafood, and food that's processed with water. Now, while scientists still don't have a clear sense of what this is all doing to our bodies, plastic pollution continues to pose a serious threat to the environment. And that includes the Great Lakes, which provide drinking water to millions of people throughout the United States and Canada and are home to thousands of species. Every year, 22 million pounds of plastic are estimated to enter the 5 lakes. And according to a recent study, 90% of lake water samples taken over the last decade contained microplastic levels deemed unsafe for wildlife. Spectrum News reporter Dana Damiani visited a new research center in Rochester, New York, that studies the life cycle of microplastics in the Great Lakes ecosystem.
A ball, maybe? A hospital band? Condiment pack?
Different forms of plastic.
This is a piece of a Rubik's Cube.
All found in Lake Ontario.
There's 25,000 storm drains in the city. So if this is what's in one drain in 2 weeks, you can imagine how much is really entering through stormwater.
Dr. Christy Tyler is a co-director of the Lake Ontario Center for Microplastics in Human Health, a research center supported by a $7.3 million grant to study the life cycles of microplastics and how they move in the Great Lakes freshwater ecosystem.
Plastic breaks down in the environment, and I think we hear that plastic lasts forever, and it degrades really pretty slowly, but it does break down. So once it's out in the environment, the UV radiation from the sun, waves in the lake or the wind, they start to chemically and mechanically break it down.
Dr. Tyler's students at the Rochester Institute of Technology spearheading the environmental breakdowns of microplastics for the project. Under a microscope, they separate organic water and soil from the Lake Ontario samples to see just how many microplastics are in the water we use every day.
We filtered them out. We filtered the samples out onto a gridded filter so that we can see what we're looking for.
Size, shape, and color. All identifiers Professor Edding Sauce has trained his eyes to look out for.
Plastics is not just one thing. There are many types of plastics. And we need to know, A, is it a plastic? And then B, we want to know what type of plastic do we have. This white piece has a good chance of being a plastic fragment that's going to there. So it's kind of white, almost clearish, but you can see how it's more jagged.
We're dealing with this influx of plastic at the same time that we're dealing with climate change. And so that's what we're trying to understand is how do those interact? And then how is it going to affect us and our health?
We know that they get into organisms, we know they get into our bodies, but how they affect the body is really unknown, and we really need to put those pieces together. So it is really scary to think about the amount of plastics that's coming into our bodies.
Questions turning into answers at the University of Rochester Medical Center.
We're essentially going to be taking some of the tadpoles, and we're going to have a treatment group where we expose them to some UV-stained microplastics. And then we're going to have a control group that isn't exposed to any microplastics.
Plastics less than 5 millimeters big, already proving a much larger issue for human health.
We know that they impair the immune system, so we know that already. We also know that some plastic that have been going in the liver can stay more than a week inside the liver.
This one is an intestine.
We're really trying to look at what type of mechanism is involved.
And we as humans, we're ingesting them, inhaling them, getting into dermal contact. We don't want to wait until we figure out it's carcinogenic and everyone is dead before we do something about it. So it's really important that we research this now.
Dana Damiani, Spectrum News.
Joining me now with more on the effects of microplastics is Spectrum News national health reporter Erin Billups. And Erin, we're in this race against time that's a little scary in part because we don't really know what the effects of this are. How do microplastics affect wildlife, and more importantly, how do they affect our bodies?
Yeah, so microplastics are used in so many things that we access, whether it's the bottles that we use for shampoo and personal care products, to fertilizers in farming. to the water, bottled water that we drink, and we ingest it. It's also leaches into the water supply that animals drink, and it gets into their bodies, and then the animals we end up eating also have microplastics in them, and so it bioaccumulates, which means the presence of it grows in the body, and the microplastics, or the nanoplastics, even smaller than microplastics, can actually enter our bloodstream and start to mimic hormones, and then start altering our endocrine system, which is the system that regulates our hormones. So we're seeing some things like, reduced sperm count in men. Some are pointing to microplastics as maybe causing Parkinson's, or impacting why we're seeing these growing number of cancer diagnoses. So because it's altering how our hormones react in the body. But again, this is just the very beginning. We've only just learned, science has only just had the tools recently to measure these micro and nanoparticles.
So as the scientists try and find out more about what all this means, how can people minimize their exposure to microplastics?
It is really overwhelming, but I think what people can remember is that it accumulates, right? So you can choose your exposures, and you can choose to minimize how much exposure you have. You can't eliminate it completely because it's ubiquitous in our world. But you can do things like avoid highly processed foods because there's lots of plastics in the processing. Avoid heating plastic, so don't microwave your food in plastic containers. Try not to store your food in plastic containers. I have stainless steel and glass containers that I store my food in. I don't even use plastic shower curtains because the shower curtains get warmed up by the hot water if you like hot showers. Drink filtered tap water, vacuum regularly because the microplastics can be in your rug, in the air, you want to get that up. And avoid plastics with recycling codes 3, 6, and 7. There are some plastics that are okay. They're bio-based or greenware or made from corn. It's not as bad for you.
Well, we're going to have to also think about this from the source, right? Is there any federal action to deal with the amount of microplastics that are being produced?
It's happening, but it's happening slowly. Everyone's becoming aware of it because as the body of science and research grows, there have been Senate congressional hearings on it. There was a executive order pushing the EPA to do some more work on this. They're trying to figure out how to improve post-use material management, prevent trash and micro and nanoplastics from entering waterways. But it's slow going because we've been using plastics in our world for so long to kind of turn that around. It's going to take a little while.
Okay, sounds like there's something for everybody to do. We'll certainly be keeping an eye on it. Thanks very much, Erin. We're not done just yet. Coming up next, we will break down the Israeli Prime Minister's visit to Capitol Hill. Stay with us. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.